Hello, beautiful souls. My name is Jessie, and welcome to my Tiny Talks podcast, the show where we'll dive into self-love, inner child healing, and discovering your soul's purpose. I look forward to chatting with you every single week and helping you grow exponentially in all areas of your life. Without further ado, here's today's Tiny Talk. Hello, you guys, and welcome back to week 29 of Tiny Talks. I truly hope that you are noticing a difference in the audio. I am just getting all set up with my new microphone, and I am super pumped to be able to deliver you guys with more improved, better quality audio, because even listening back to a few of my past episodes, I noticed that the quality isn't always the best, but that's the thing about life. Sometimes we just need to start and to jump in and to begin the journey and figure things out as we go. And that is exactly what I have been doing and trying to do. So I truly hope that this sounds a little bit better, the quality is a little bit better, and all we can do is grow and evolve and level up from here, which is the amazing thing about life, is that we can just begin somewhere and then reflect back and notice how much we've grown, even though sometimes we don't notice that growth from day to day. But I certainly have noticed such a big shift in myself even in the last couple of months. So nonetheless, I am super excited to be jumping on here with you guys. I hope you all enjoyed last week's episode, which was all about if your space is potentially playing a role in your stress, how our space can stress us out if we have a lot of stuff going on, or we just have things around us that are no longer serving us, or whatever it is, and just how important it is that our space makes us feel grounded and comfortable and at home, which I think really segues nicely into this week's episode, which is all about grounding. And I'm going to be diving into what grounding is, benefits of grounding, how to ground yourself. And then next week, I'm going to be coming back on here to share with you guys different grounding techniques outside of what I'm going to be sharing with you guys today, because I definitely recognize that this is a big subject. This is a big topic. There's so many things that I am still learning and evolving with each and every day. But every time I jump on here, I'm basically sharing what I've experienced, what I've gone through, what I have learned. And no, not one size fits all. But the thing about grounding is that it affects me differently than it would affect you. But the benefits and the reasons behind it are always the same across the board. So I am super excited to dive into this topic because I think it's something that we don't really do very often. We often don't think about grounding ourselves, or even maybe have never heard that word before. I know that I never heard the word grounding until I worked at a trauma-informed agency when I was living in Alberta, and I worked at a sexual assault healing center, and they focused a lot about grounding and coming back to your body and that mind-body connection. And I never really realized that I wasn't grounded for pretty much my whole life, or at least subconsciously, I didn't know that I was. And once we begin to open that door and to learn about ways to support and benefit our body, it's so important that we listen and honor that. So I'm truly hoping that today's episode and next week's episode, all about grounding, just benefits you and gives you maybe some light at the end of the tunnel, that there's so many ways that we have within ourselves to tend to ourselves, to tend to our body, to reconnect ourselves, and to ground ourselves. And so I first off just want to share kind of how this episode came into play for me. So I always like to sit down once, twice, 3 times a week and just brainstorm ideas. And as you guys have witnessed throughout my episodes, sometimes the ideas just come to me, or sometimes they come to me and I don't even really know why or where it's coming from. And so for this episode, basically what had happened is the last couple of weeks, I've just been feeling a little bit overwhelmed, but I guess a good overwhelmed, in that I'm trying to figure out what my next steps are, where I'm going from here, what I want to come next in my life. And whenever we have those feelings, it's super normal that we start to feel overwhelmed, because our mind likes to catastrophize and it likes to go down a rabbit hole of, when we have one thought, it roller coasters into a next, and then a next, and then a next. And so I've noticed myself feeling very dysregulated, and I can honestly say that for most of my life, I've kind of felt dysregulated. And what I mean by dysregulated, it's that my mind and my body aren't on the same page. So meaning my body is subconsciously doing what it has to do to keep me alive, and my mind is kind of on a different path. It's drifted me away. And the reason that our mind likes to drift away is for many different reasons. And there's pros and cons of our mind drifting away. But for me, it was happening because I was at a state of overwhelm. And when we get overwhelmed, our brain doesn't like that. It doesn't like that because it triggers our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. Because if we're feeling overwhelmed or targeted or at a threat or feel the need that we're going to have to respond, our body likes to shut our mind off and take it somewhere else. And a lot of us live like this subconsciously without even realizing it because we've just lived in that autopilot state for so long. And that is how I have been living for most of my life. And I started to get it under control. And I've recognized recently that as I'm kind of trying to figure out my next chapter, my mind is going to that same space again. And so I've been trying to focus really, really hard every single day, several times a day, to ground myself. And I've seen the benefits. I've witnessed the benefits, even with my clients in my past position, time and time again. Grounding is one of the best things that we can do for ourselves to just reset our mind and our body. Because when our body isn't at that rest and digest state, so that's when our parasympathetic nervous system is on, that's what comes on when we're sleeping. It's our rest and digest. It's our body's natural homeostasis. But when we're acting out of a state of sympathetic nervous system, which is basically when our stress response is online, our fight or flight, we're in overdrive. And one of the easiest ways that we can combat that overdrive, even for short periods of time, is to ground ourselves. And grounding is something that takes practice. It takes consistency, it takes effort, and it takes consciously remembering to do it, which can be hard sometimes, which is why I'm coming on here with this episode, but to also give you some tips and tricks of why it's so important to remember to ground ourselves. And so like I was saying, I've been feeling really, really stressed. And so I knew that grounding has worked for me in the past. I've witnessed it firsthand. And so I've just decided to incorporate it back into my life. And so, like I mentioned, next week I'm going to be sharing more ways that we can ground ourselves. But for this week, I'm going to be physically talking about grounding ourselves in the earth. And what I mean by that is physically going outside barefoot and grounding yourself. Standing with your 2 feet in the dirt, in the sand, in the ocean, in a river, in grass, whatever it may be, something from the earth, and physically grounding yourself. And so this is something that I've been trying to do every single day when I start to get overwhelmed or even when I'm not. Because that's the thing about anything with our mental health or just in life in general, is it's about being proactive in it instead of reactive. Because if we can teach our body to be grounded and to be safe and to know that it doesn't have to drift off, the more that we're retraining our brain that it's safe to be in our body and in our mind. Because again, like I mentioned, the reason that we drift off and our mind likes to go into that dissociative state is because we don't feel safe. We feel like we need to fight, we need to flight, we need to run. Our mind likes to pull away to protect us. And so when we are grounding ourselves, one thing I always like to tell myself when I'm doing so is, this is where you need to be right now. Nobody else needs you in this moment. I bring awareness starting at the soles of my feet, working my way up to the crown of my head. So I'll notice the sensation. Is the ground wet? Is it dry? Is it soft? Am I walking on rocks? Is it a little bit rougher? What's the temperature like outside? Is it cold out? Is it raining? Is it sunny? What can I hear? Is there birds? Is there a dog barking down the street? Do you hear cars? What do you smell? Do you smell flowers? Do you smell fresh air? Is somebody maybe cooking in the house next door? What do you smell? Right? So as I just mentioned with all those things, those are our senses. And our senses are the 5 things that help bring our brain back online. And so when we're able to just pause for a moment and to ask ourselves those questions, it allows our mind to stop thinking about whatever it is that's overwhelming us and to bring our conscious mind to the present moment. Because oftentimes when our brain drifts away, it's because it's thinking about something that's happened in the past or is worrying about the future. And so we're not living in the present moment. And so that's one of the benefits of grounding, is that we're able to be physically in the present moment. And it's so common that we're all living in this state of past or future. And I just imagine a world that we all lived in the present moment. And I recognize why this doesn't happen because it's, again, like I've mentioned in past episodes, it's not our natural instinct to be in the present moment. We need to think about the future because we need to prepare for the future, right? Our mind and our body just naturally over time has adapted itself to think in the future, to worry about what's to come next. But if something horrendous or something traumatic has happened in our past, our mind also remembers that and wants to refrain that from happening again. So what it does is it pretends like it's happening all the time. Whenever something similar picks up on a cue that has happened in the past, we instantly get thrown back like we're living in that moment. So when we can ground ourselves and bring awareness to our mind and our thoughts and our bodies and our surroundings, we're able to live in the present moment. So I kind of just want to give the definition of what grounding is. And this was a definition that I had found through a YouTube video that I was watching. And again, everybody's going to have a definition different than each other. Everybody's going to reside with it differently. But what this woman spoke about in her video, and I'll link the video down below, it was a great video. Basically, how she identified grounding was that grounding is the energetic act of reasserting yourself into your body, of rooting and expanding your presence and awareness in a life force in the material, physical world. So basically, it's the energetic act of reasserting yourself. So coming back to your body. So again, that mind-body connection and bringing awareness to your surroundings in the physical world. And by physical world, I just mean physical things that are around you. And I guess to kind of get into, based off of that definition, why it's so important that we consciously root ourselves and ground ourselves into our body is because technically we're all always physically in our body, right? Like somebody could be looking at me for an instance, or let's say, for example, I have a client coming into my office and they are someone who struggles with dissociation. So dissociation, again, is when your mind likes to pull away, basically likes to rip the power cord and just drift you away. So I know by looking at this person that they are physically in their body, but to that person, they might not feel like they are. They might feel like they're watching themselves in a movie or they're acting in third person, right? But it's so important that we actively root ourselves because we are always technically physically in our body, but it doesn't always feel like we are. And it gets a little overwhelming when we leave our body because it can be subconsciously or consciously. We might recognize that it's happening or we might not. And so that's why it's so important that when we are able to recognize that it's happening, we're able to pinpoint that for ourselves. And again, this can take time to recognize that it's happening. We might not realize it. I didn't realize that I was acting out of a state of autopilot for years until I was shown and educated on what that means to not be grounded and to not be in your body. And I think that it's something that, unless you've studied it or you've gone to a counselor, gone to a therapist, or done your own research, I think it's something that we don't realize that we're doing. I just think of how many people are walking around with dysregulated nervous systems, acting out of that state of parasympathetic and not being at our rest and digest, being in that survival state, right? I even think back during COVID when everybody was just so heightened in our emotions and everybody was angry and irritated and lashing out. And that happens when we're not grounded and we're not in our body, because our body and our mind is doing absolutely anything that it can to keep us safe. And I do just want to say that there's a right place and a right time to allow your mind to drift off. And for me, I've decided to set time aside every single night when I meditate to allow for that to happen. Because I think there's a clear difference between acting out of a dissociative state, so feeling overwhelmed, and using your imagination and allowing your thoughts to wander. Because our mind has over 8,000 thoughts a day. Our mind is constantly cycling with information and taking everything in more than we can even fathom. If we could physically understand how much our brain takes in, I don't even think we would have the ability to walk or talk, because our mind would just be so alert with everything going on that it has to have some ability of control. But it's okay to allow our mind to drift off at times, right? To imagine, to manifest, to go to those places. Imagine if this happened, right? That has a positive context to it. if we're resting, if we're meditating, reflecting on our day, if we're journaling, if we're processing, whatever it is, there's a right place and a right time. But identifying that for ourselves before we go into that. So even for myself, before I meditate at the end of the day, I like to tell myself, you are going to go, you have permission to let go, to see where the mind goes. And I personally like to incorporate essential oils into my practice because our sense of smell is our first sense that comes online. It turns our limbic brain back online, meaning we're back in our body. So when I incorporate essential oils into my meditation practice, I'm allowing my mind to drift off, but I'm allowing my body to stay present and grounded through the act of smelling and through the act of deep breaths. So it's okay to use our imagination. It's okay to process. It's okay to rest. It's okay to meditate. When I talk about grounding, it's helpful when we're at that state of overwhelm. And again, being proactive in it, incorporating it into our life each and every day. And I do just want to recognize that if you have gone through something traumatic, it can be overwhelming to ground ourselves by ourselves in the beginning. So as always, I definitely encourage you, if you are struggling with this, to reach out to a mental health professional. Reach out to someone who is educated in this area. Because it can become overwhelming if our mind is turned offline and we try to come back to our body, but sometimes our body isn't the safest place to be in. So it's important to identify where you're at and go from there. I had to go see a therapist for 3 years before I was able to take this on for myself. So noticing where you're at with that journey. But I remember even when I worked at the Sexual Assault Healing Center and I was working with clients, one of the first things that we always do with clients is grounding. So basically how our systems worked is that they would come work with us who are coordinators, and we would do something called psychoeducation, which is basically educating about the mind and the body and how it works and how trauma affects the brain and the body. Because when we have an understanding of why things are happening to us, it gives us that permission that our body isn't out to harm us. It's out to protect us. And I remember having that shift in my thought one day of just, wow, my body's not trying to hurt me. My body doesn't hate me. There's nothing wrong with me. My body is doing what it thinks is best to do based on what I've gone through and where I'm at right now. But so one of the first things we'd always do with our clients is to focus on grounding, doing breathing techniques, coming back to your body. And again, I'm going to share those different ways next week on next week's episode. But the reason that we always started with that when beginning trauma healing is because if we're not in our body and we start to go down that processing route or of digging into our past, that can become extremely overwhelming and dysregulating. So it's important to notice where you're at and to start small. And again, with today's episode of physically grounding yourself in the earth, that is such a great, easy beginning place to start at, because you don't have to do anything besides stand there and let it do its work on its own. One of my favorite poses, yoga poses to do when I'm grounding myself is just mountain pose. And if you are not familiar with yoga or what mountain pose is, it's basically just standing still, having your feet shoulder width apart, having your hands down by your side, having your head straight up, almost like someone's pulling a string from the crown of your head up, and you're just standing there. It is a very active and engaging pose. And it's such an easy pose because all you have to do is stand there and bring awareness to your body, to your hands, to your breath, to the ground. And so now I'm going to dive into some benefits of doing that, some benefits of grounding yourself outside of just coming back to your physical body. Because of course that is the first benefit, as always, is bringing your thinking brain back online, coming to your body, retraining your brain that it's safe to be in your body, even though maybe it always once was, or it never was before, or maybe it wasn't in the past. Retraining your brain that it's safe. The world is safe. And again, that can take time depending on what you've gone through or what you have experienced. So some benefits of grounding. I think for the first time when I learned about this, I thought it was a bunch of woo-woo. I couldn't believe that there were so many benefits of grounding yourself. And there's lots of different research and videos and books and resources and all these things out there that talk about this. And everybody kind of has a different approach. But I chose to pick the benefits of grounding that I thought have really personally helped me and I have witnessed firsthand helping other people. And so I'm just going to read them off and then kind of go into how that would work. So some of the benefits are reduces inflammation, reduces chronic pain, speeds healing, improves sleep, increases energy, lowers stress, improves digestion, helps relieve muscle tension and headaches. And again, all of these, as always, is never a promise. These are just ways that I've seen benefits in the past. It's not a guarantee that this will happen, but these are areas that can improve when we consciously ground ourselves. And again, before when I was talking about the parasympathetic nervous system, our rest and digest, when we're acting out of that state of rest and digest, our body is able to naturally tend to itself. Our body is just so incredible in the fact that it just knows what to do to look after ourselves, right? We don't have to tell ourselves to breathe. Our body just knows to do that. We don't have to tell ourselves to blink. We don't have to tell our heart to beat, or for our liver to function, or our kidneys, or our stomach, our throat, our speech, whatever it is. We don't have to tell our body to do that. It just knows that it has to do that. But when we're not in that state of rest and digest, and we're operating at a state of sympathetic nervous system, which is our overdrive, that is our fight and flight, that is our stress response. When that happens, oftentimes we have so much cortisol going on in our body, which is our body's natural stress hormone that is released when we operate out of that state of fight or flight. And when that happens and we have all this cortisol, our heart has to work so much harder, right? So again, when we see the benefit of grounding increases energy, of course, if we're at a state of rest and digest, our body is able to just relax, increases our energy, lowers our stress, right? When we think about it from that perspective, it's not woo-woo, it's science. When we are resting, our body is just able to naturally tend to itself because it doesn't have to worry about everything else around us. And again, this is about finding balance because we're going to always switch. And we're not even going to know that we're switching sometimes from that parasympathetic rest and digest to our stress response. We oftentimes don't know that that's happening. And again, that's why proactive grounding and bringing intentional awareness to grounding each and every day is so important. So for today, that is my challenge for you. To go stand outside. To go in your bare feet like a child again. Get your feet dirty. Go stand in the grass. And be intentional. How do you feel? Does it feel overwhelming? Do you feel calmer? Maybe track how you feel for a week straight after grounding yourself. Notice what comes up for you. Notice what comes up for your body. If you're feeling a headache or you're feeling a lot of stress or anxiety or overwhelm or whatever it is, pause. Go outside and ground yourself. Sit down, lay down, put your feet down, put your hands down, whatever it is that feels in alignment and you are ready for in that moment. And then one thing that I always find helpful again about the proactive piece is setting an alarm or putting it in your schedule. In my schedule, every single day from 12 to 1 when I have my lunch break booked off, I'll always put a subnote that says, how are you feeling? Do you need to ground yourself? Or go ground yourself. I'll give myself little cues. And now after a while of doing that, I just find I remember more often. I'll even just be walking around my place and I'm like, okay, how am I feeling right now? Do I need food? Am I tired? Am I feeling irritated? Whatever it is. Our brain is constantly laying down new neural pathways. It's constantly retraining and rewiring itself. If you even think about yourself now in your thought process compared to 5 years ago, you can see the difference, and that's because we are always adapting and changing. We can change our routine, we can change our habits, we can get into the habit of recognizing when our body is calling out to us and being able to respond to that. If we truly begin to listen to our body, it will always give us the answers. But we have to be willing to listen. We have to be willing to trust that our body and our gut and our heart and our mind knows what's best for us. When we get those gut feelings, honor them. They are there for a reason. Our gut will never veer us wrong. Our subconscious mind is so much more intelligent than I think we think it is sometimes. It has such higher awareness of ourselves and our body and our reality than we can have consciously. So it's so important that we tend to our body, tend to our mind, connect the two together, and grounding is such a great place to start with that. So that is my challenge for you, is to go ground yourself and notice how you feel. Notice how you feel before, notice how you feel after. Track that. I truly hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, and I am super excited to hop on here next week and just share some more grounding techniques with you all. I recognize that this was a huge pattern that I was noticing when I was asking you guys what you want me to talk about. It's how to come back to your body, how to feel safe. And again, I don't have all the answers to that, and it's up to you guys to do the work. I'm hoping that this is a great first place to start. And if you notice yourself feeling overwhelming, pull back. Maybe reach out again to get some help. Don't push your body past where your body is at. Yes, get outside your comfort zone. Yes, challenge yourself. But also honor for yourself when something is becoming too overwhelming to the point of it being too much. I want to thank you guys, as always, for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks. This is a subject in an area of life that I'm just super, super passionate about. And I'm definitely not an expert, and I am still learning, and I am still growing, and I am still trying to become the best version of myself in this area. And it takes work and it takes time. But I promise you that the end result is so beautiful. There is so much light at the end of the tunnel. We all deserve to feel safe and to be in that state of rest and digest. So I want to thank you guys so much for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks, and I can't wait to chat with you all next week. Bye, you guys. Thank you all so much for tuning into this week's episode of Tiny Talks. If you're looking to connect, you can find me on Instagram at JessieBrown13. I look forward to chatting with you all next week. And remember, get out of your head and into your heart.